Asana is not a stranger or newcomer to our Daikas. He is a friend of our country, friend of Sri Lanka. At the same time, Singaling දේශනා කරන උන්වහන්සේ තාම මේ කැමති සිංහලෙන් දේශනා කරන්න. නමුත් ඉංග්‍රීසි කිව දෙනෙක් නිසා ඉංග්‍රීසි භාෂාවෙන් දේශනා කරાવી. ලංකාවේ he was ordained in Chisik Buddhist Scholar, London Buddhist Scholar. He got his ordination during the Sadhatisa's time. One day became a monk at the London Buddhist Scholar. That time we were in Heathfield Garden. Such a long time. He has been a good friend of our Nayakas at the London Buddhist Scholar. He had been in Sri Lanka for many years, following the Forest Sangha tradition in Sri Lanka. So no need to take a long time. Today, we welcome Venerable Sir, Venerable Kasava Thero, the shackles of Mara, the promise of Vesak. This is the topic he has given to us. With my respect, I would like to invite you, Venerable.
කවුරුත් එහෙනම් සාධනාද පවත්වන්න. ගෞරවනීය අපගේ ඕගොඩ සීලවෙන නාහිම්පාන මහන්සේ ප්‍රමුඛ මහා සංඝරත්නයේ අවසරයි සදහවත් පිමුතුනි devotees of the London Buddhist Vihara on this rather special occasion. One is honored to have been invited to speak on this particular topic. This institution is an extremely important and symbolic and revered Buddhist institution, and one which is, or arguably should be, regarded as the flagship not only Sri Lankan Buddhist institution, but flagship Theravada Buddhist institution per se in the Western world, and actually very possibly the flagship Buddhist temple, considering the fact that this venerable institution was established as of next year, 100 years ago. This is a temple. Unlike the Buddhist society, which I serve, which is a society. However, the message of the enlightened ones is the same and is designed for one purpose in the final analysis, and one purpose alone. The Anagarika Dhammapala, back in 1926, had a very special vision and a very broad vision, which was that the message of the enlightened ones would, according to my understanding, be disseminated via the British Mahabodhi Society, the Mahabodhi Society, via the London Buddhist Vihara, and these are two very, very historical institutions which are very much respected and whose mutual mission today, as in times past, is one of, in whatever way, in various ways, in unfolding ways, in accordance with the transforming needs and situation which unfolds throughout the history of any institution or institutions, or in any circumstances. And the circumstances which were present when the Anagarika Dhammapala established the London Buddhist Vihara and the British Mahabodhi Society back in 1926 was somewhat different. The society was very, very different. The world itself was very, very different. The people involved were very, very different. But above all, because of the rare and invaluable, priceless nature of the mission of such historical figures as Anagarika Dhammapala, and in respect of their noble objectives and vision, it is beholden upon those who inherit this legacy to accomplish the task in accordance with the vision of the founder or founders of such immensely important and relevant institutions as the London Buddhist Vihara and the Mahabodhi Society. This institution, or these institutions, are uniquely placed to deliver the message of Dhamma, the message of the Enlightened Ones, which we commemorate during Vesak and throughout the Vesak celebrations each year, commemorating the birth, the Enlightenment, and the passing of the Enlightened One. The message which was delivered by the Enlightened One was as a result of the profound realization which he achieved at the foot of the Bodhi tree on what is historically regarded as the full moon day in May over 2,500 years ago, and the legacy of which has delivered immense happiness to millions of people worldwide, possibly billions, throughout that long history. It is indeed a sad fact if one reflects on the atrocities that have been committed throughout history against Buddhists. This is true. This is historical truth, historical fact. For example, the destruction, the wanton destruction of the University of Nalanda in northern India, which was apparently raided by invaders and razed to the ground, thousands of monks slaughtered, monks who were engaged in meditational study as per the instructions of the Enlightened Ones for the purpose of nothing else than liberation from samsara, liberation from the round of rebirth. Very profound concept, unique, in line with the teachings of the Enlightened Ones, to the teachings of the Enlightened Ones. Rebirth as opposed to reincarnation, two things which are often confused, particularly amongst the uninformed, in regard to the teachings of the Enlightened Ones, but actually to both scholars and those who are engaged in spiritual development, quite clear and juxtaposed due to the constant awareness and emphasis which is laid, unique emphasis which is laid in the teachings of the Enlightened Ones on the absence of self, the absence of an I, the absence of... This is a saviour, this teaching. However, it will only be savoured as such, understood as such and savoured as such through the realization of such. That realization requires commitment. That realization requires a form of spiritual maturity of souls. I have personally had this conviction for a long time that people are, in effect, born with some sort of level of spiritual maturity or otherwise, which will be necessary in order, first of all, to arouse the attention toward not only the teachings of the Enlightened Ones in general, but the specific issues regarding which the Enlightened One spoke in relation to unsatisfactoriness, and to deal with them. There is required a certain level of spiritual maturity. Even those who may be spiritually mature are held back by what one may refer to as the shackles of Mara. Those shackles are very, very significant indeed, and the practitioner can at times often feel as if he is literally shackled by, in particular, three currents, three forces, which are the main and major obstructions to spiritual development. Three large obstacles. Three currents which constantly affect and harass and bother the minds of beings. That is none other than greed, hate, and delusion. These are, in a sense, the main shackles of Mara, due to the influence of which the untrained mind is subject to temptation, constant temptation, by way of the gratification, the desired gratification of the six sense faculties: the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind. And there are people who often nowadays talk about the impediments of modern technology as opposed to their advantages. There are so many advantages to, admittedly, modern technology, without which many things would not be possible. And yet, with that come many temptations, and we find nowadays that the younger generation is, on one level, in one sense, very, very different to past generations. Even the generation referred to now as either Generation Z or the one before it, will, on the whole, be more distracted, for example, would tend to more distraction than past generations, in the sense that the availability of sensual stimulation, the ready availability of sensual stimulation and sensual gratification is far greater than it was in the past. When I think back to my childhood, for example, during primary school and secondary school, when there were no such things in this world as mobile phones, smartphones and so on, it would have been easier for children and young people to focus on what needed to be focused upon, on their studies and on other things, such as the fostering and development of basic values and basic human traits, such as, for example, politeness and so on. We hear people moaning nowadays about people staring at mobile phones and not focusing attention on others. In some cases, of course, it will be necessary to deal with various communications. However, if there is to be heart-to-heart communication between beings, between human beings, then to this end, external impediments are obviously unhelpful, and this will have its effect upon the entire society. This will permeate throughout society. Nowadays we find a big problem. We find people moaning and groaning about the lack of community, for example, in society. And arguably, particularly in countries such as Great Britain, though in these countries, because of the weather, because of the climate, the tendency is for people to live behind closed doors and windows and to keep to themselves more, relatively more, than in warmer climes in tropical countries. However, even in countries such as Great Britain, in the past there was indeed a sense of community, and certain events, certain crisis can pull people together very well, such as during the Second World War, the end of which has just been commemorated in this country, the 80th celebration, or VE Day, when people had much more of a sense of community, of neighborliness, of togetherness, particularly due to having come through that horrific crisis together, come out the other side of that, fighting. But even after this period, there was a sense of neighborliness which continued up to a certain point in the past, which was relatively more intense than nowadays, it would appear. And the reason for this is because, obviously, of the increasing complexity of society, for example, and people's consequent distractedness, and also as a result of such, for various reasons, the increasing obsession with, in effect, I, me, and mine, which is in stark contrast to the message of the Buddhas, which is the antithesis of I, me, and mine. And due to distractions, and which tend to make the mind vulnerable to temptation toward sensual gratification, the forces of unwholesomeness, of greed, hate, delusion become stronger, these currents get stronger, and people in some cases can be swept away with greed, become blind to the precariousness, the danger associated with such, to the point where they're obsessed, and they, in some cases, will turn a blind eye to the dire, in some cases, consequences of unchecked sensual gratification at the expense of others, the nourishing of the ego. And coupled with what the Buddhas spoke of as erroneous view, or miccha ditthi, this is an explosive and extremely harmful cocktail. For example, one recalls during one's lengthy period of residence in what is now known as Sri Lanka, what was at one time known as Sinhalese, and then Ceylon, and what is now known as Sri Lanka, during one's period there of over 2 decades. One recalled, for example, hearing stories of certain heinous, evil acts which were performed during the terrorist conflict by terrorists, murders of innocent people, and hearing of these individuals, in some cases having converted, having given up their former religion, and converted to a faith which enabled them to go to a church and to confess their sins and to ask forgiveness and to believe that they would be forgiven for doing it, and then very possibly going out again and committing the same or worse acts of evil. And this is due to miccha ditthi. And what happened on that so rare and wonderful day at Vesak was that through the Enlightenment experienced by the Buddha, in this case the Gautama Buddha, the Buddha Gautama, he re-revealed the Buddha's ancient path, which is what he first of all spoke of following his enlightenment. 2 months later, on the occasion of the Esala, the full moon of July, the re-revealing to the world after a very long period of time, of maybe aeons of time, during which there was no fully enlightened one in the world, the Four Noble Truths, which are referred to as what we call right view or samadhi, correct view or right view. That is unsatisfactoriness, the cause of unsatisfactoriness, the cessation of it, and the way, the path to the cessation of unsatisfactoriness. Very, very clear and comprehensive path, which was one thing which I remember, and I do often speak about this, struck me as a boy, aged 13, when, before coming into contact with Dr. Siddhartha and the London Buddhist Vihara in Heathfield Gardens, I initially went to the old Thai temple in Ishi back in 1976 and picked up one or two books, two or three books, such as What the Buddha Taught by the late Venerable Walpa Rahula, and Venerable Piyadas's The Buddha's Ancient Path, and Venerable Jnanatiloka, the late Venerable Jnanatiloka, the German monk, his small book, The Word of the Buddha, and read about these basic teachings. Above all, the primary one being the Four Noble Truths, which struck me as being a very practical path. There was something right about this. It just felt right. And an answer to what I was seeking, even at that age. As a boy of 13, I had been feeling unsettled since around age 8, unsettled and distracted. I'm asked as to the reason why, but I believe it was very possibly due to my mother's illness. My mother, who had epilepsy spanning around 3 decades, which was very, very unsettling. So this was the issue in our family, which caused a general sense of unease and discomfort. One's own mother's tremendous suffering. So the Four Noble Truths are very simple, actually, in their message. Unsatisfactoriness, the cause of it, the cessation of it, and the path leading to the cessation of it. Now, the first one, unsatisfactoriness, when spoken of to those uninformed, is immediately, in some cases, interpreted and felt to be something which appears to be negative. But if people were to just be a little patient and go on to the second noble truth, it would arouse curiosity, the fact that the Buddhas pointed to the cause of it. And then, if one goes on to the third noble truth, that of the cessation of unsatisfaction, this is nothing pessimistic at all, this is nothing negative at all, this is positive. The cessation, the liberation from unsatisfactoriness. The liberation from the shackles of Mara, the bonds, the temptations. What was portrayed in the ancient texts, and which is actually very apt as a representation of it, but in today's changed world could be regarded as being in some way by some politically incorrect. The Enlightened One during his strivings was tempted by what are portrayed as the three daughters of Mara, the dancing girls of Mara, which are referred to as Tanha, Arati and Raga, or craving lust and boredom, I believe. And the Buddha to be, and even subsequently, these forces were extant but not in the mind of the Buddha, came to tempt the Buddha on certain occasions, but the Buddha had transcended that temptation. And these are another manifestation of the shackles of Mara. What is Mara? Mara is variously translated, in some instances as the evil one. The fact is that there isn't actually a person called Mara, but Mara can manifest through a person. That is the gist of it. Namely, what is not Dhamma, or what is referred to in some cases as Adhamma, what is against the power of Dhamma, is in effect Mara. And those forces are present. And are something which are linked to the process of being. Now, this is a very profound concept which those unfamiliar with the teachings of the Enlightened ones may find it offhand rather difficult to grasp. Being, everybody is, in inverted commas, being. Most people would believe that we need to be, we need to exist, we need to continue. But this is being in the context of the deeper aspect of the teachings of the Enlightened ones. Very profound concept. We function within the confines, within the framework of a certain type of reality, not normally thinking of, in most cases, in the minds of most beings in the world, not considering ultimate reality. We function within the confines of conventional reality, namely constructs. And the notion of an I and me and mine in the form of being a person, being someone, being this, being that, being a person, being a personality, is the coarse layer of delusion, which is the obstruction to the attainment of the first stage of liberation from defilements, and the first stage of liberation leading to the cessation of unsatisfactoriness, namely Nibbana, the cooling of the flame of craving in the heart, right here and now, by oneself, through one's own efforts, in accordance with the teachings of the Buddhas, who exhorted all to be islands unto themselves. It's absolutely true. Throughout this procession of life, each and every one will encounter many obstacles, many challenges, some more than others, depending upon their circumstances, which are dictated largely by the effects of past actions in this life and past lives, which come to fruition in various ways, wholesome and unwholesome. Some have a relatively easy life, but that doesn't solve the problem. So the Bodhisattva, prior to enlightenment, is held in such immense esteem, having been a prince, having had everything, and yet still being curious about the nature of life, in spite of the fact that his father had tried to hide it from him. And then, due to the power of his past karma, the striving through various lives as the Bodhisattva, the seeker of truth, the curiosity was too powerful. And he ventured outside the palace and came in contact with the four signs of a sick man, an old man, a corpse, and, according to some accounts, a shramana, what is called a shramana, or an ascetic, similar to a monk, though the order of monks had not yet been established, the Sangha had not yet been established. And these triggered even more curiosity in the mind of the Bodhisattva, which eventually led to that realization under the Bodhi tree on that august and unique occasion of Vesak, traditionally regarded as having occurred on the full moon day of May, over 2,500 years ago. On which occasion the enlightened ones unceremoniously shake off entirely the shackles of Mara and actually address Mara, according to the accounts in the ancient texts, declaring that that power which was once wielded by that entity is no longer present, has been overcome, has been defeated and shattered. Now, that is an occurrence which happens very rarely, the arising in the world of a fully enlightened one, and our path, our, as it were, destiny in the context of the dictates of the results of our past actions by way of body, speech and mind in the form of karma and its effects, or phala, the fruit of those actions, may and will likely be very, very, very different. And those who do, amongst those who do realize the Dhamma and achieve liberation, the vast, vast, vast majority will attain to perfection, what is known as arahantship, and attain to Nibbana in that way. Nibbana is Nibbana, the ultimate effect is the same, the cessation of craving, as a result of which the power of Mara and the strength of the shackles of Mara is broken for good. This is the promise of Vesak. The shackles of Mara, the promise of Vesak. The message delivered over 2,500 years ago by the Enlightened One, which was a re-revelation, actually, after the previous Buddha passed away, attained to Parinibbana, the Buddha Kassapa. For a very, very long period of time, this teaching was hidden because the jungle, the thicket of delusion grows over so quickly. Because sensory delight, sensory temptation is so strong. There is a belief that if the Mahasangha, the order, were to become extinct in the world in not such a long time, perhaps just roughly guessing, perhaps 200 or 300 years, the teachings would largely go into decline, into decay. Some may speculate, intellectualize, thinking that, oh no, as long as the teachings are there, then there will be some who may be able to develop. But the power of defilement is such that in lay society, relatively very quickly, the Dhamma may come into decline. And in fact, one recalls one period in the history of what is now known as Sri Lanka, but which at that time, 1753, as recently as that, was known as Sinhalese, which is recorded in the Upcountry Convention of 1815. It came to a point where there were no fully ordained monks in Sinhalese at that time. And as many of you may have heard, the king at the time, I believe it was Kirtisri Rajasingha, had to send a delegation to Siam to request the king for assistance to appoint a delegation of monks to be sent to Sinhalese in order to re-establish the higher ordination. At that time, in Sinhalese, that nation was known by that name at that time. It was corrupted to the word Ceylon by the British. Apparently, there were certain lay people who are referred to in the Sinhalese language as Ganinansela, who had ended up being identified as some sort of religious people or priests by a mere presence of a yellow or saffron-coloured thread tied to their wrists. And they would be the people who, on behalf of people, would offer, for example, the Buddha puja and so on, doing this for people, serving the people in that way. And at that time, also, it's very likely that as a result of the lack of monks, that in consequence, due to also to the lack of guidance of the Mahasangha for the people, that people would have become more focused on more mundane things. For example, when monks are present, such as on this occasion, people congregate, people listen to sermons, people invite monks to almsgivings, people wish for blessings, people require monks to officiate at funerals and so on, in the process of which it is our task to guide the populace in the ways of goodness, the ways of wholesomeness. the ways of wholesomeness are something which are something very unique and profound in the teachings of the Buddhas. For example, there are those who commit acts of goodness, increasingly more so apparently in recent decades, for the purpose of, and with a view to, rebirth, for example, in heavenly states, such as the worlds of the deities. But when we refer to this, it is referred to as acts of, in Sinhalese, pinkam, punya karma. But when we refer to kusal or kusale, this has a higher meaning. This is something connected with the spiritual development, or something which is going to actually facilitate one's spiritual development. For example, in the process of almsgiving, people will gain merit, as a result of which this will result in favourable rebirth, sometimes in exalted heavenly states such as the Tavatingsa or the Tusita, worlds of the deities, these planes of existence, due to the wholesome state of mind generated from them. But here, this also rests upon the intent. If one commits an act of charity or dana, which is undertaken with the intent of the diminishment of greed or attachment in one's own mind, that is in itself evidently a renunciation. And this is as a result, spiritual development in practice of sorts. So, therefore, this is the context in which acts of charity will actually aid one's attainment of Nibbana. So that is where, in the context of the striving on the path to Nibbana, though Nibbana is not a place, but we must relate these things in certain ways. Here we make use of, we utilize our actions which are committed by way of body, speech and mind toward the objective of spiritual development itself, liberation of the mind from the shackles of Mara, from greed, hate and delusion, through the development of three fundamental qualities, if they may be described in that manner. And that is, first of all, mindfulness. Mindfulness with a capital M, as I always call it. The original mindfulness. The mindfulness of the Buddhas, not the feel-good mindfulness, which has been repackaged in the West, which also has favourable results for people, beneficial results, undoubtedly, but is a sort of cul-de-sac. Unless one practices mindfulness for the purpose of a spiritual development and going beyond. This is the preparation of the foundation of one's own spiritual development, the laying of the foundation of mindfulness, is all encompassing awareness from moment to moment of what one is doing. All this is actually, from moment to moment, actually guarding against the temptations thrown up by Mara, who is attempting to shackle beings by way of the temptations connected, which are infused with greed, hate, and delusion, the constant temptations. So mindfulness is a guard, a sentinel of sorts, a guardian, a sentinel, and is a life-saving practice. There are those who commit all sorts of horrific deeds due to unchecked greed, unchecked hate, unchecked delusion. Hate, the quality of it, is akin to fire, when people suddenly become all consumed by rage, for example, and commit crimes such as what are referred to in British law as crimes of passion, for example, which are actually a transformation in that moment of, in this case, lust, which has transformed into hatred, and in some cases its extreme of revengefulness, which is even more powerful, and all-consuming. So mindfulness is something which is a life-saving practice. And however, though we practice this presence of mind, if one may describe it that way, in order to go further we need to make use of samadhi, of the practice of concentration, the mind. And if possible, developing the absorptions, very, very deep states of concentration, utilizing the power of the absorptions in order to do what? In order to cut through the delusion, which is actually blocking, clogging up the mind, as it were, and blocking the passage to realization of what is referred to as the truth of the way things are, and that is the characteristics of existence. That is impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self. And samadhi comes into its own in the teachings of the Enlightened, through the teachings of the Enlightened ones, by focusing on the perception of impermanence. What is impermanent? It cannot be satisfactory. What is impermanent cannot be I, me, or mine, on account of the fact that one cannot control things. One cannot wave a magic wand and demand or determine that things be permanent. One cannot wave a magic wand and demand somehow that things become permanently satisfactory. One cannot wave a magic wand and conjure up a permanent entity, an I, a me, a mine. How advanced the teachings of the Enlightened ones are can be seen partly by way of the fact that they are so unique in revealing very boldly the absence of a self. This is not to be confused with no self, which was a view and opinion, one of the 62, what are referred to as 62 wrong views, whether there is a self, there is no self, neither self nor no self, whether the universe is, there is a beginning, an end, or neither a beginning nor an end, and so on and so forth, all speculation. the Buddhas revealed these subtle truths such as non-self, the absence of a self. The reasons to which he pointed. It is a mere belief. The body clearly is not self, breaks up, turns to dust, returns to the great earth from whence it came. And uniquely, the Enlightened Ones, whilst describing what is known as a being, a person, as a mere view and opinion, which is comprised of 5 aggregates of attachment, that is what is known in Pali as Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara and Vijnana. The consciousness, Vijnana, having been compared to a conjurer at 4 crossroads, which conjures up what it will, including this belief in an I and me and mine. And even in fine material states of existence, such as the deities and the Brahma worlds, which pertain to through development of samadhi, still this very stubborn belief in a self is present. And the Buddha famously on one occasion even admonished Mahabrahma, the deity called Mahabrahma, who believed that he had created the universe, saying that even he is subject to these laws of impermanence and so on. And for this reason, the consciousness itself, which is subject to impermanence and arises where the conditions for it are present, and when those conditions are not present, it does not arise, and it is impersonal. Arguably, it is like other entities, but they are, in final analysis, impersonal. So this is why we say that there is a conventional reality within the framework of which we need to function in this world, in this universe, and there is an ultimate reality. And the practitioner of Dhamma, one who is focused upon and intent upon breaking free from the shackles of Mara, is one who fosters and constantly nourishes and protects as a very precious gem this understanding of ultimate reality within one's heart and mind, whilst going about one's normal business, one's daily business. Life goes on. And yet, there's an inner transformation. And this is also something which is a wonderful thing, that we can meet certain people in this world who are on the surface of it apparently people who appear to be normal, and yet can in fact be those who are spiritually very, very developed. So one cannot tell from appearances what a person is like. And the Buddha said that it is possible, if one strives, to realize either of 2 fruits, that is the penultimate stage of liberation or liberation itself, within a maximum period of 7 years and a minimum period of 7 days, if one is really intent upon this practice. This is how practical this teaching is. So we are very, very fortunate to have received these teachings, to be the heirs of these noble and utterly priceless teachings of Dhamma, Dhamma having been realized by the Enlightened Ones on that wonderful day of Vesak, over 2,500 years ago, This is the way through the practice of mindfulness, concentration, insight to be free, liberated from the shackles of Mara, and to fulfill in that way the promise of Vesak. May you all be well and happy. May you all be able to attain to the bliss of Nibbana without delay, even in this very life itself. Akasatta ca bhummatta devanaga mahiddhika punyantang anumoditva chirannakantu sasanang. Akasatta ca bhummatta devanaga mahiddhika punyantang anumoditva chirannakantu desanang. Akasatta ca bhummatta devanaga mahiddhika punyantang anumoditva chirannakantu tvang sada.